The underhive is lit with thousands of burning braziers. They stand on poles and are slung from chains from the high plasteel rafters that soar above the small conglomeration of huts and hovels. They are wedged in the spaces between the banks of gigantic pistons that seized up thousands of years ago. We're standing at the top of a wide sweep of stairs that leads down to the vast hall. We are now dressed in rags and headscarves taken from the dead underhivers. Our packs have been swapped for ragged rope-strapped sacks. Our lasguns swathed in strips of dirty cloth to conceal their well-maintained appearance. It turns out that the group we killed were tool merchants who scavenge and repair whatever they can sell or find. It was a workshop we found them in. They used to spend half their time traveling from settlement to settlement. Carrick stands at the front of our group, the colonel right behind him, ready to grab him if he tries to do a runner. He's firehole, the underhiver says, grinning and revealing his stubby, brown-stained teeth. Good trading at Firehole. Alas, plenty of trading at Firehole. He looks at me and flinches, his expression changing to an oily, sycophantic smile before he looks away. We will circle around, says the colonel. We should avoid contact as much as possible. No, says Carrick, his voice a nasal whine, wholly in keeping with his scrawny, withered appearance. They have seen us already. Wonder why we not come if we leave now. Is good, no worries. We trade, we go on. They know not where we go next. The colonel considers this for a moment and nods. We will do this your way, he says. But if we run foul, you will be the first to die, understand? No worries. Derflin had not run you afoul, you see. Yes, Carrick says, almost bowing because he's so hunched over, the same ingratiating smile on his face. Derflin talk. We sell, they buy. Is our last good? Yes. The colonel nods again, and Carrick leads us down the steps. He puts a small hammer from his belt and then produces a triangular sheet of metal hung on a chain. Holding up the chain, he begins to rap the hammer against the sheet, bringing out a sharp clang every few steps. He begins to holler, his accent so broad I can't understand what he's saying. No talk, he says, looking over his shoulder at us. He eyes us critically, obviously not pleased with our disguise. A leering look enters his eye as he examines Lori. Mouths give you away as outsiders. I say, you cousins, brother keepers of the great cog, you learnin' tool trading from old Derflin. You promise keep ears open and mouth shut. That's why you not talk, yes? As we approach, people emerge from the hovels of the firehole. Most are semi-naked, dressed in leather aprons, heavy kilts, and thick breeches, their chests bare. This goes for the women too, and like the men who emerge, they're also painted with orange and red flame designs, from navel to shoulder. Some show branding scars on their faces, breasts, and arms, and the men have a strange F-shaped rune burnt into their foreheads. A few have small children with them, unmarked as yet. In all, about 30 or 40 gather around us as we walk to the middle of the settlement. I can feel heat rising up from the ground, and I guess that there are some kind of forge or furnace below us. They once worked the huge pistons, but now have been turned to another use. The fact that they're fire worshippers is as plain as the nose on my face, and their whole lives are based on this valuable resource they've built their settlement on top of. One of them comes forward from the group, his bald head glistening in the light of the braziers. His skin is swarthy. He looks at us with dark eyes. He's broad and muscled, the flame designs dancing across his chest and biceps. He looks about 30 years old, no more. Praise the imperial flame, he says, holding his hands above his head. There's a murmured echo from the other folk gathered. Long has it been since the people of the great cog visited us. I am Fire Father Supernus, and you are welcome in my town. He extends a hand, his arm rippling with taut muscles, and Carrick shakes it, bowing over so slightly in his cringing fashion. The great Cog has sent us, says Carrick, nodding ferociously. Yes, with bounty he has sent us, bounty for the trading. Our halls grow dim and cold, and we bring the gifts of the great Cog to trade for the warmth of the imperial fire. My cousins here, they come from distant halls, strangers who, alas, wanted to see the magnificent imperial flame. The leader of the firehole looks at us, head cocked to one side. You are welcome. You are welcome to Firehole, distant travelers, he says. Perhaps I might show you the Imperial Flame once we have completed our business. Alas, good to see, says Kedrick. Sorries for my cousins, for they have vowed not to speak except in the great hall of the great Cog. For no worthy of words except the great Cog. There are things you have, I am sure. Trading, down to trading. We here for that. We pull forth our sacks of salvaged hammers and spanners, gears, shovels, and other assorted junk. Carrick squats down and spreads out a large oil-stained sheet pulled from his pack. Taking our wares, he lays them out, carefully grouping them by function, and then left to right, an ascension of repair. We lay out everything from broken bits of wood to fully functioning hand drills. The people at Firehole crowd close, pointing at various items, muttering to each other. Some items they pick up and pass around to examine until all are empty with what's on display. Where's seen? Says Firefather Supernus, looking over the crowd and receiving nods of agreement. Let the trading begin. Chaos breaks loose as a disorganized auction begins, with everyone bidding for different items, waving their fists in the air, bellowing their offers, pushing and shoving to point at the objects of their bids. The Firefather is in there with the rest of them, shouting his own bid. Carrick squats, looking up at the press of bodies, mentally taking note, nodding, shaking his head, and bargaining with 20 people at once. Now and then, an agreement is reached, and he picks up something from his sheet and hands it over. He receives a handful of tatty pieces of paper in return. Slowly, piece by piece, the sheet is emptied until only a few items remain and the crowd has drifted away. So, Thorpe is going, he's world building again, right? And I had said in the past that this world building doesn't really matter so much for this book. And it matters more in the other one. And it does really matter more in the next book, but I guess in general, like the disconnect for me is I think this came out in early 2000, maybe late 90s, late 90s, 1999, December 31st, maybe. I just don't see much lore about Armageddon in general. There's the whole thing with, well, I'm not going to spoil the next book. There's one thing that happens in Armageddon, and that is the whole point of the next book, I think. So I guess that's a nice build-up, but like Armageddon has basically just been like neglected. There's Gazgul's codex entry, and then there's Commissar Yarek's codex entry, and Yarek is from another time, a completely different time when Warhammer was like whimsical and marvelous. He has an orc power claw, and he wears it to like intimidate the orcs, but there's just no way. I shouldn't even have to explain why that wouldn't work or why there's no way. First of all, it wouldn't work. Second of all, why? And like, so also you have the Armageddon Steel Legion, which I guess their aesthetic is almost German, World War II, I guess. You know, they were cool, but then the Krieg came along, and the Krieg also wear gas masks. So they're like, okay, which gas mask faction are we going to give the most love to? Are we going to give it to the World War II German guys, or the World War I German guys? I mean, because of this, like, I don't really know much about the Armageddon Steel Legion in general. Like, okay, they hate orcs. So do the Valhallans. So do the Attillans. So I mean, so do the Kroot, right? I mean, hating orcs really. Even like the Cadians have kind of like this fortress lifestyle. But I don't know really much about the Armageddon Steel. Just Games Workshop. I guess the reason why I'm just pointing out all the world building here. Somebody used the F word. Somebody used the F word with Warhammer, and that really made me upset. They said filler, and I guess that's kind of what this is, like, right? Because it's like it's kind of getting in the middle of the story, but for me, Warhammer, like, the world building is the story. It's the whole reason to read it. Is to be immersed in a strange land from a stranger time. So I guess you know what, Mr. Thorpe, I guess to answer my own qualms, you did just fine. You did just fine. You produced Warhammer. I guess I'm just a little upset that GW, it took them 30 years, 20 something years to finally be like, hey, let's follow up with this. Let's figure out what's going on in Armageddon. But at the same time, I mean, I guess you could have 1 million battles at Armageddon and have none of them matter. So there's that. Gnarly. Oh, there is a really cool map. I just passed it. Yeah. So they landed in the jungle, and then they screwed around, and I believe this is, oh, I guess it just says it right there. I wanted to say this is the fire base right here. Where is Firebase? Well, I mean, I think they pretty much made it right here. Yeah, they had to like bypass all the forces. These, I believe, are defense lines. I don't think there's any rivers on Armageddon. Oh yeah, maybe they're rivers. There are rivers on Armageddon. That's nuts. And there's an ocean. Okay, well, I guess the difference between Armageddon and like other worlds, then, if there's rivers and a sea and an ocean, that they haven't completely ruined their world yet. And you know, actually, okay, if you want lore, the best piece of lore about the Armageddon Steel Legion, or Armageddon in general, is Cage. He said in one of the other chapters, he was like, I have never seen a world so racked with war without it just like being destroyed. Because I mean, that's what happened to Cadia. There was just too much war. It couldn't handle all that war at the same time. Entering the hollowed out block, we find a conveyor cage. Its open ironwork is suspended on chains that are looped around gears hanging from the ceiling above us. From the shaft billows smoke and heat, causing sweat to spring up on my face. Distant sounds of industry, the clinking of metal and the crackle of flames, echo from below. Swinging open the conveyor door, he waves us inside. We cram inside the small space, and Supernus pulls a brake lever. The gears begin to slowly shift in motion, lowering us down the shaft. The elevator is obviously not part of the original piston room above. The walls are chipped and hand carved from the ferrocrete. Small alcoves here and there contain burning lamps that scarcely illuminate the dark passage. We pass down about 20 or 30 meters until the shaft opens out, replaced with metal girders that guide the elevator. Beneath us stretches a massive furnace room that eventually disappears in the smoky gloom. The heat is intense from the high open furnace doors. Everything is bathed in a red glow. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, toil at great coal heaps with pails and shovels to feed the furnaces. From young to old, their painted flames are smeared with sweat and toil. Their labor keeps the fires burning. Braziers gutter everywhere, lending their smoke to the fumes of the furnace. As the elevator touches down with a loud, crunching clank, Supernus opens the door and we step out. He swings the door shut and slaps loudly on the framework of the cage, which lifts off a moment later, clanking back up into the gloom. It's then that the noise hits me properly. There's the crackle of flames, the creaking of great steam wheels, and the hiss of boiling water. But there are also groans and moans and the crack of whips. Through the gloom, I see stooped shapes shuffling amongst the lines of workers, barbed whips in their hands, cudgels and clubs occasionally raise the beat a flagging worker about the back of their shoulders. They're unmistakably orcs. I look to the colonel who spotted them. Before he can do anything, shapes loom out of the shadows behind us. More orcs, 5 of them, are carrying heavy cleavers and maces. Their thick green skin catches the red hue of the furnace fires, and the flames glint off their dagger-like tusks and pug-like noses. Their red eyes regard us malignly. Pug-like noses. I hope. I think he meant pig-like noses. Pug-like. I mean, they do have pug-like noses, but there are no pugs. There probably haven't been pugs, and I mean, by this point in the future, that breed of animal would have been like so thoroughly bred. Let's see. Sound check, sound check, sound check. Sound check, sound check, sound check. Okay, good. Yeah, the pug would have been so thoroughly bred that its nose would eventually just like, I don't know, it would be like inside out or something. We freeze, none of us willing to make a move for our weapons. They have the advantage of surprise. A look from the colonel warns us to play it cool. Carrick begins to whimper, and there's a wet, dripping noise as he soils himself. He cowers on the ground, covering his head with his arms. I catch Brownie's eye as he shifts nervously. A heavy poncho over his shoulders conceals the loaded, heavy stubber, and a loop of ammo trails from his pack. Behold, the fires of Supernus, the Firefather declares, reaching his arms wide, his face a picture of exhalation. The imperial flame was great, but the flames of Supernus are mightier still. See the fires that never dim, hotter and brighter than ever before under 100 fire fathers. We say nothing, and he reads the fear and anger in our eyes. The zealous look is replaced like a businesslike expression. I know you, assassins, he says with a cruel smile. Emperor von Strab warned me that you would come for me. Emperor von Strab? Blurts out Kindrug before he can stop himself. A triumphant gleam enters the Firefather's eye. Or perhaps it's just the trick of light. I knew you were no cousins of this wretch, he says. He bends down and snatches the notes, still gripped in Carrick's hand, and waves at them. Jealous outhivers, that's what you are, isn't it? You heard that Firehole has grown strong again, bringing warmth and life to everyone. The great Emperor von Strab is generous in his gifts, and you wish to claim them for yourselves. He looks at the orcs and smiles. His needs are great, and we must protect his interests, he says. Without them, the fires would dim, the furnaces would grow cold, and the palaces of the Emperor would be lifeless. Bountiful was the great day when the messengers of the Emperor came to me. See what I have here? These laborers? They labor for me and me alone. Slaves, the Emperor snaps. You made slaves of your own people. Oh no, says Supernus with a horrified look. They are new converts, brought together under the fires of Supernus. My people share in the generosity of Emperor von Strab, for I am not a tyrant. The colonel snorts. And what of us? What do you think you will do with us? You shall pass through the cleansing flames and join the great works of Supernus, the Firefather says. It is not fitting that those sent to slay me should end their lives in the great furnace they tried to quench. The colonel says nothing, and I look around, desperately seeking some way out. The conveyor has gone. The orcs are behind us, and there is nothing in front of us except an endless stretch of furnaces and slaves, with more orcs among them. I can't see any obvious route of escape. Bind them, Supernus says, receiving a questioning grunt from one of the orcs. He shakes his head in disbelief. He grabs Carrick's arms, drags them behind his back, and imitates wrapping something around with his wrists. Tie their hands up, you idiots! The orcs step forward, and one reaches out and grabs my left arm. I act without thinking, wrenching my knife from my belt, driving it up the soft underjaw of the alien. It becomes buried in the handle. Lori's clubbed down by a brutal backhand slap. She spins to the floor with blood flying from her split lips. The colonel whips out his power sword, turning the motion into a sweep that clearly severs the arm of the closest orc. I just have time enough to pull my knife free and duck as another orc swipes at me with its cleaver. The blade whooshes past my right cheek and tears through the fleshy part of my shoulder. The colonel spins and chops the orc's head off in a single stroke, the blood fizzing and spitting along the length of the power sword's glowing blade. I see Kelth huddled on the ground, trying to crawl away, but he catches a boot in the ribs and rolls over with a shocked shout. Another orc lunges for me, and I spin away, coming face to face with Supernus. The Firefather batters a huge fist into my jaw. My legs threaten to buckle underneath me. With a roar, I drive my left fist into his nose, splitting the bridge and driving the cartilage into his skull. He flies backwards, blood spraying from his broken nose, and I dive on top of him, my knife at his throat. I wrestle with him, between myself and the orc. Stop, or your master dies, I shout, and the orc pauses for a second before bringing its blade down into the Firefather's head, splitting it to the cheek. It gives a guttural chuckle as it wrenches the blade free, blood and brain fluid dripping from his hand. Not master, it says, its large jaw twisting obscenely to form the words, slave! I throw the Firefather's body into the orc and scramble away. I manage to get to my feet as the orc flings the corpse of the Firefather aside. Lori rears up behind it, swinging her lasgun like a club with all her strength. The stock connects with the back of the orc's head. The creature merely grunts before turning around and swinging wildly with his broad cleaver. The blade chews a notch in the lasgun and sticks. The orc pulls towards it, bringing the lasgun from Laurie's grasp. I dive towards his exposed back, my knife held fast in two hands, and plunge it downwards into its skull. The force of my charge bowls it forward into the ground. By now, the other orcs are running towards us from the slave lines, yelling and growling. They wade through the press of bodies with their clubs and whips, clearing a path. That's until a woman, younger than me, her long black hair matted with blood and filth, drives the end of her shovel into the face of her enslavers. Another orc batters her across the side of her head with its cudgel, smashing her face and toppling her. Her act has ignited the whole mob. Like a ripple in a pool, her resistance spreads to the slave mob. Flailing with buckets and shovels, clawing and biting, the slaves rise up against the orcs. Emperor knows how much degradation and impoverishment has led to hatred and anger in an instant. The 24 or so orcs react viciously, breaking bones, crushing skulls, and tearing off limbs. But the mass of humanity is too much for them, as the seething crowd overwhelms them. Their raw loathing demands the destruction of its creators. The orcs disappear under a pile of bodies, some dead, some alive, but all crushed by the sheer weight of their foes. We watch in stunned silence as the crowd begins to part. Some of the slaves wield gory trophies, such as a severed head or hand, and wave them in the air. It is all over in less than a minute. The cheering begins, and the bodies of the orcs are hoisted into the air and over the heads of the freed slaves before being tossed into the furnaces. Some start singing and dancing, but most of them flood towards us, and we react quickly until our backs are hit with the metal wall behind us. The celebrating mass presses in towards us, shouting things, clamoring for a touch. I fear for my life more than ever. It looks like they'll mash us to death with their praise. I step on something soft and glance down to see Carrick cowering behind me. My foot on his hand, I drag him to his feet and push him away from me. "Get back!" the colonel bellows, brandishing his power sword. The crowd falters a moment and then sweeps on. The people at the front are pushed onto us by the weight of those behind. We thrust them away as best we can, shouting for them to stay back. After a few minutes of breathless wrestling with the mob, we manage to push them back far enough to get some breathing space. They're still shouting and cheering, and a sea of grinning, yelling faces and waving hands in front of us. The colonel grabs one of his freed slaves, an elderly man with a whip across his shoulders, his face caked with coal dust and soot. "How do we get out of here?" Schaefer asked, sheathing his sword and grabbing hold of the man's arms. "Out?" the man says, his eyes crazed, half vacant. "No way out." "No, stay here, no way out." "The coal ramp," says a bearded man from behind the old-timer. "We can climb out of there." He turns and speaks to the people behind him, pointing over their heads. The message is passed through the crowd. Eventually, the consensus is reached and the mob begins to move away, flowing down the wide aisle between the coal piles and furnaces like a filthy tide. They begin to scramble up over the fuel, some forging over ahead, others stopping to help the children and the elderly. We look at each other, dumbfounded by the stupid turn of events. "Ever started a revolution?" Kendrug asks, no one in particular. "Twice," says the colonel, walking forward to peer up the conveyor shaft. "The firefather must have some way to call down the elevator." "Perhaps he just shouted," suggests Brownie, craning his neck to look up in the darkness. "Unlikely." "Why don't we just follow them?" I ask, pointing to the men and women clambering up the ramps where the coal is dumped. "We are here to hunt Von Strab, not liberate the hive," says Schaefer. "We must avoid complications." "Won't they wonder who we are?" asks Kindrug. "Word's bound to spread." "All the more reason to get as much distance as possible between ourselves and this place," says the colonel. "Now, look for something to call the elevator." We examine the area, looking for some kind of comms or lever, but there's nothing but battered old pails, broken shovels, and dirt. "He must have been worried that the slaves might try to storm the lifter," says Laurie. "Perhaps it's hidden." We recommence our search, examining the walls and floor. Ohabs gives a cry of triumph as he peels back a piece of sacking hanging from a large nail. Suddenly, it seems very out of place. Behind it is a small rope dangling from a pole on the wall. Ohabs tugs the rope. A few seconds later, machinery grumbles to life, and we see the elevator rumbling down towards us. We step back and ready our guns in case it's carrying more orcs or some other hired thugs in the dead firefather's employ. As it rattles into view, we see a triangle, a single man in the elevator. His wide eyed astonishment makes me chuckle. He desperately looks around as if to magically find some way of stopping the conveyor. Don't think about shouting, I warn him, my lasgun pointed at his head as the conveyor shakily drops down the last few meters. He holds his hands as Kelf steps forward and pulls open the door, waving him out with the barrel of his pistol. We heard fighting. I thought the fire master was in trouble, he says, looking around. His gaze rests on the corpse of Supernus and his shattered skull. He looks at me with horror. You killed the firefather? Actually, that did, Brownie says, pointing to the dead orc I knifed in the neck. You profited from this slavery, the colonel says, his voice deathly quiet. The angrier he gets, the quieter he gets, and his voice is barely a whisper. He raises his pistol. I, the man stammers, stepping backwards. The colonel's bolt pistol booms, and the fire worshipper's head disintegrates in the cloud of blood and splintered bone. His headless corpse collapsing to the floor in front of the conveyor. Bring him, the colonel says, pointing to Carrick, who's curled up by the wall, one hand over his eyes, the other clutching and wringing his tunic nervously. Laurie grabs the under. Okay, they leave. Great, they left. Yeah, this book is starting to show its age just a little bit or something. So the colonel says you benefited from this slavery, right? And to the layman, you almost might imagine that like he's against slavery in general, but the Imperium is filled with slavery. I would go as far as to say that just like if you were to just pluck any random Imperial citizen out, you would have to probably go through a million before you didn't find someone that was a slave or a serf or something. They're like, for example, and their starships, in order to like load the fucking Nova cannon, which is just it's the biggest gun anyone's ever made. It's an Ordinatus. I think the Ordinatus and the Nova cannon is the same thing. Maybe it's not. Maybe the Nova cannon is just a bigger Ordinatus. There's like entire gangs of slaves that have to be like rotated because they die because like it does it's not even enough for them to like move the shell into play or the rat whatever the big thing that they shoot, right? It's not even enough for them to move it into place because like when it fires the chamber door shuts, and so if the Imperium if they decide they have to shoot fast enough, that means not waiting for everyone to leave, the chamber before they fire. The valley, it turns out, is a great gash across the Underhive. At some distant time in the past, the crust of Armageddon gave way under the weight of the Hive City and opened up a fissure that plunges down several kilometers. Heat and steam issue forth, and Heat and steam issue forth, and the glow from deep lava illuminates the whole chasm. For level after level below us, and soaring half a kilometer above us, the rip extends. Like a ragged cross section of the whole underhive, you can see the twisted, crushed depths and more spacious populated upper levels. Before the fissure heals itself far above us, meeting the hive city proper, the levels just stop, chambers broken in half, walls crumbling from centuries of subsidence. The gap, some 200 meters wide, is crisscrossed with bridges of all types, from terracrete spans to chain link, rope bridges to metal structures, all bowing under their own weight. The lip of the fissure is teeming with crowds and other life. Spiders the size of dogs scuttle out of holes and drop from above to feast on discarded rubbish. And bats swirl overhead, darting from shadow to shadow, and feasting on the clouds of insects hovering from the thermal updrafts. Small birds, no larger than my thumb, flit to and fro, their chirps resounding along with the chirping of fire crickets. Gantries extend across the gap, from rickety wharfs made of charred wood to elegant half arches jutting from several layers above us. There's a great throng of people gathered over the fiery chasm, some with nets trying to catch the flitting birds, other on their knees praying. As we walk to the rubble-strewn lip, a priest dressed in a red robe is performing a wedding a few meters to our right, mumbling the rites in high Gothic. The couple, dressed in their best rags by the look of it, offer him 2 dead rats, which he casts to the molten rock below, blessing their union. Others are casting their possessions to the flames, chanting, slapping themselves, baring their loins, and indulging in all manner of other bizarre behavior. Carrick stops and we admire the view for a moment, shaking our heads. Sweat prickles on my face under the headscarf. It runs down my cheeks and the back of my neck. There are lots of people here, I guess thousands, if not tens of thousands, stretching up, down, left, and right as far as I can see. Those, more than about half a kilometer away, disappearing in the heat haze. In front of us is a swaying rope bridge with metal bars for a floor. On it, people squeeze past each other as they meet coming in opposite directions. It attaches to a metal A-frame dug into the ferrocrete of the opposite floor and leads to a low, dark tunnel. We have to wait for a while as a large group of men swathed in robes and hung with chains made from finger bones hurry across the bridge, casting nervous glances downwards. Walking out of the inferno, I feel a tremor of fear. It's more than just the natural disquiet of walking across a ramshackle bridge over a raging inferno kilometers down. No, I'm reminded of the warp dream, in which I fall into a purifying inferno. I glance over the edge of the bridge, one hand grasping the rope guide tightly. My eyes sting from the heat. I can't see anything except the red glow and the roiling steam. Then I notice the silence. Suddenly the chasm is deserted. Even the birds and insects have disappeared. Laurie has her head craned up to see above us, and the colonel turns, shoulders his way past me, and grabs Carrick by the arm. What happened? Where have they gone? Too late, wails Carrick, flapping his hands against the top of his head with terror. Run! Run now! He tears himself free from Schaefer's grasp, head down, plows past me, his spindly legs moving at speed. Below us is an ominous rumble as the walls of the chasm begin to shiver. Stones topple off the edge into the depths. The rumbling grows louder and steam belches up around us. I glance over the edge and see a dark cloud racing towards us. For a moment, I realize that it's thousands of winged creatures rushing straight out of the chasm. These must be the Triceptors. Run! I bellow, sprinting after Carrick. The others need no encouragement, and as fast as we can, we haul ourselves across the bridge, which sways violently from side to side, causing us to lose our footing. Slipping forward on metal rungs, polished smooth by generations of feet. We're not fast enough. With a deafening flap of wings, the Triceptor swarm engulfs us. Each is only the size of my hand, with 4 broad bat-like wings. On thin necks, their beaked heads swivel and peck. tearing at our clothes and skin, their small claws shredding and gripping. Several are biting at my headscarf, their wings battering my face. Others hang from my arms as I flail around. My face is bleeding from a dozen tiny cuts in an instant, or caught with a tip of talons as things fly past. I can't see any of the others in the black morass of flying beasts. I bow my head and charge, stomping Triceptors underfoot, stumbling forwards with no idea how far it is to the other side. I can feel their greasy, furred bodies pushing at me through tears in my flesh. I have to pause to rip one free. It is trying to claw its way through the groin of my trousers. I fling it aside in disgust. I'm snorting heavily as I run, breathing through my nose. I am scared of opening my mouth in case one of them gets in there. My foot lands on solid ground, and not expecting it, I trip, falling forwards, crushing more Triceptors underneath me. Scrabbling forwards on all fours, I feel someone grab me under the arms and haul me to my feet. I half run, half dive, suddenly finding myself clear of the living cloud in a small passageway, lying on top of Carrick. A couple of creatures are still attached to me, and I stand up to pull them free, throwing them down to the ground. I grind them to pulp them with the heel of my boot. The colonel bursts out next, sweeping up with hands at lingering Triceptors. He is swiftly followed by Laurie and then Spooge, who's whimpering from dozens of lacerations torn into his flesh. Brownie comes out next, panting heavily, dragging the weight of the heavy stubber behind him. He collapses to the ground next to me, dabbing a ragged sleeve at the cuts on his forehead. His headscarf has gone completely. The others appear in a large clump, falling over each other in their desperation to get clear. Kelth yells as the last land on top of him. Triceptors, yells Carrick. I warn you, be quick, but not quick enough, yes? What are they? Says Laurie, still looking up at the chasm, as if expecting them to return. Where did they come from? They live down in the depths of the valley, says Carrick. In holes, gutters, nooks, and crannies. Every night the valley rocks. The river of fire surges, and they come free, flying higher for food. Each morning they return. Not good to be in the valley when that happens, yes? He gives a guttural chuckle and slaps his thigh. You think Derflin look ragged, eh? He says, pointing at us. You look like proper underhivers now, yes? As the others pick themselves up, tugging at torn clothes and nursing their wounds, the colonel grabs Carrick by the shoulder. He pulls him close, his voice harsh. If I were a suspicious man, I would say you were trying to betray us. Carrick recoils from the colonel's anger. First, there is the debacle at Firehole, and now this. I said that if we run foul, you will be the first to die. The colonel pulls out his pistol and thrusts it against Carrick. The tool trader flings himself prostrate at the colonel's feet, sobbing and muttering, stroking at the colonel's bloodstained boots. No, no, he gibbers. Not betray the colonel. Derflin, like less chances, he does. Free those people. Go to kill the overlord, yes? Derflin, not lie. He always slave in the fire pits, yes? Not know evil in Firefather's heart. Not know anything. Not been to Firehole for many years. Overlord to blame, not poor Derflin. Must cross the valley to get to the Overlord. Oh, yes, we must. The colonel looks down at him with a disgusted expression and kicks him away, holstering his pistol. How far to Von Strab? He says, crossing his arms. One day, no more, Colonel. One day, no more. Carrick says, his forehead still pressed against the metal mesh of the floor. Yes, tonight. Derflin know a good place for sleeping. Tomorrow we go through the tunnels, and then we buy the Overlord Palace. Tomorrow night at the latest. And where are these tunnels? Says Schaefer. What will we find in them? Nothing in tunnels. Except rats, says Carrick, trying to cringe lower. Only to Overlord, lest you wanting more orcs. Orcs everywhere. Overlord army everywhere, this side of the valley. How dangerous is it? The colonel says. Durflin not lie is dangerous, yes, dangerous, he says. But Durflin travel the valley side many times. I know secret ways, rat ways. Orcs not find us. Overlord army not find us. Laurie, Cage, scout out tonight's camp, says Schaefer. Come back here if it is clear. Is close, says Carrick. Down this tunnel, take first tunnel on the right. Crawl tunnel, big enough for us and rats. Too small for orcs. Durflin hide there before. Is 6 grating on the floor, drops down into Fanwell. Yes, 6 grating. Fanwell has other tunnels, check them too. Find the rats, no orcs, I reckon. Did you get that? I asked Laurie, and she nods. Come on, let's not hang around. Carrick wasn't lying. The tunnel sends us to a complete rat nest of interlocking passages, ducts, sewers, alcoves, teeming with giant rodents. They flee when we approach, their chittering echoing off the metal and stone walls. Using handheld glow strips, we find. Oh, actually, I guess it's kind of been in front of me this whole time. It's been so obvious. It's a hive world. I guess Cadia is not a hive world. Krieg is not a hive world. That's what makes them different than everyone else is they're hivers. When the Marines in the Pacific were doing their island hopping, something that they would tell themselves is like, look, our opponents, they don't live in jungles. They've probably never been to jungles, and their home island, there are no jungles. There's nothing. And so I think that this means that, like, well, you have a guy like Finn who actually lives in the jungle. Finn is basically just a Catachan. He's a Catachan Armageddon trooper. He's not a true. I mean, but that's why is they would all basically be like Cage in the sense that they know they have hive sense. They can tell where shit is. Looks quiet enough, I say, and Laurie grunts in agreement. She shines her torch at the hatchway. We should look through here to make sure nothing's in there, she says. You first. Ducking through the door, lasgun in one hand, torch in the other, I find myself in a room high enough to stand up in. Walkways lead up to doors on each side. An old factory machine lies dormant. It is a labyrinth of conveyor belts, gears, and metal boxes. Something cannons onto my back, sending me flying forward. Spinning to my back, I drop my torch and reach for my lasgun. Lori steps forward, lashing out with her foot to send my weapon tumbling out of my grasp. She pulls at her lasgun, the barrel pointed straight at my face. Go for your knife, she says. Please. I slowly pull a dagger free. As her finger closes around the trigger of her lasgun, I toss it away, clattering under a machine that looks like a splayed rib cage. What are you doing? I ask, keeping my voice steady. I've been waiting for this for over a year, you bastard, she says, spittle flying from her lips. In fact, ever since you left Typhos Prime. Is this about Court Norm? I start to sit up, but she signals for me to lie back down with the thrust of her rifle. You guessed that all on your own, didn't you? She says, sneering. What gave you that idea? Lauren's death wasn't my fault. No, but it was the bullet through his head that killed him, she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. He got slack. Didn't pay attention, I utter, slowly edging away. I'm not responsible. It was a war, idiot, she snaps. You heard how we were brought up. We were bred for fighting. We expected to die in battle. And that's what happened to Lauren, I retort. Yes, she says, but this isn't about Lauren, it's about me. Look, I'm sorry that you're the last one left, but it's better than being dead, isn't it? I cast around for some kind of weapon. There's nothing. Are you really sorry? She says. Actually, no, I admit with a shrug. It's not my fault, is it? It's your problem. You deal with it. I'm about to, she says. But the only reason I'm here is because of Inquisitor Oriel. He was the one that got me out of there. You left me behind. We thought you were dead, I snapped, my anger rising. You charged off, and we thought you were shot. You didn't check, did you? She snarls, her pale skin in the light of the glow strip. I might have been wounded, but you didn't care. Just one more dead freak, I bet. I never thought that, I say, shaking my head. You were a last chancer. We're all freaks in one way or another. You didn't think anything, did you? She says, taking her hand away from her lasgun for a moment to swipe around the front of her hair. A moment later, she's focused on me again, her eyes darting, daring me to make a move. There wouldn't have been one of us left, would there? None of us. None of us remember who we were, where we came from, just a bunch of dead soldiers. Don't blame me, I say with a curl of my lip. I didn't make you. Frag you. I stand up slowly, my stare fixed on her. So what? I snap. You're going to kill me because I was more concerned with my own survival than some stupid woman who ran off? Because you're a freak of nature that should have never existed? Because you're so proud that you're still alive, she says. You're a survivor, aren't you? Inviolable, painless, Survivor Cage. That's you, isn't it? You'll outlast the Colonel, you think. But you don't deserve it, do you? You've done nothing. You even threw away your last chance. I never pretended otherwise, I say, exasperated. Just fragging shoot me and have me done with it, for Emperor's sake. Oriel told me about you, she says with an arch expression. You're tainted evil. I'll be doing you a favor. Oriel can frag and talk, I sneer. He reads minds, you know. Actually, he just lets people read his, she says. Otherwise, he would have never let me rejoin the Last Chancers. He'd know I wanted to kill you. Perhaps he did know. I wouldn't be surprised. Perhaps he did. You're either going to shoot me or not, so get over with it, I say, staring straight at her. I'm not going to shoot you, she says, grabbing her lasgun by the barrel and letting it drop beside her. So what the hell is that all about? I'm going to use my hands. Well, if you've noticed, like especially in this book, and maybe in others too, there's like this rotation between the Last Chancers. It's difficult to have more than like 3 or 4 active characters. I mean, at that point, it's just like a fucking committee. I was actually kind of just like bored with Lori this whole time. Like, basically, she's just like female Cage at this point. Like, she's always ready to kill. She never gets killed. She gets hit really hard. She's a survivor. She's a killer. She's basically just been Cage this whole story. But now she actually has like a personality. So thank you Thorpe for giving her some development. It was very much needed because I thought that she was basically just bland. I mean, it's not, you can't just say that your character is like genetically modified. There has to be some sort of like something. They have to have some sort of personality. You can't just say XYZ and this makes a character. Well, I mean, okay, I can't say it. The XYZ is the character actually has to have character. Lori cracks her knuckles and smiles at me. You're good, but you best shoot me instead, I say with a laugh. So, one time somebody tried to get funny with Lori and she like destroyed him immediately. So, look, I can live with the whole. I'll look. I will give Lori the chance to like. I will give Lori the chance. I duck the next punch, only to find it's a feint, as the toe of her right boot cracks into my chin, snapping my head backwards and sending me into my ass again. This isn't funny anymore. She lets me stand up, and I launch myself at her, throwing a quick left-right combo that she bats aside with her forearms, twisting quickly and sending a back heel kick to my knee. I topple to the ground. She says nothing, just stands there bouncing on her toes as she waits for me to get to my feet. The bitch is taunting me. She thinks she can kill me. She wants me to feel pain. No holding back anymore. I'll teach her pain. I claw my fingers and rake at her face, grabbing the wrist of her arm as she shoots out from the blow. Bending sideways, I twist, wrenching her arm out of the socket. Her shrill cry sounds like sweet music in my ears. She tries to punch me, and I block the blow, slapping her arm away, driving the fingers of my free hand into her stomach, just below the ribs. She falls, gasping for breath. I kick her in the face, splitting her nose open. Her head slams against the floor, her red blood vivid against her pale skin. The sight of it sends a thrill down my spine. Leaning forward, I grasp her hair, longer after a month without being cut, and drag her head forwards. My fingers find her eyes, and I dig deep into the sockets. I wonder whether to stop, but the sight of the crimson patterns across her white flesh brings out an urge from deep within me. This is what I exist for. Leaving her mewling on the ground, I get up and stalk across the room, stooping to fish out my discarded knife where it lies. The blade feels cold, and I hold it against my cheek. I walk back over to her as she tries to crawl away. I grab a leg and haul her back, and she twists, trying to kick me, her good arm flailing in thin air. I can hear the breath whistling out of her lungs. I want to see them. I lick the knife clean when I'm finished. Blood tastes saltier than I remember. I can taste blood as I wake up. In a moment of recollection, I remember the fight with Lori. I snap my eyes open, disoriented. There's blood on my hands. My knife lies next to me. I'm sitting with my back propped up against the machine, and I can see the toe of a boot poking around the corner. Not sure what I find, I pull myself up, dizzy, leaning on the machine. I stagger to the corner, trying to ignore the pounding in my head. What I find is a ragged, bloody mess, almost unidentifiable. All except the shock of white hair on the scalp. I throw up. Cage is the best. He's the best hero ever. He's the greatest, I think, out of anyone. Because he's flawed. He's not actually a hero. He's just a villain that is forced to fight. I think Cage wants to be good. I think the deep down he just doesn't understand why any of this happens. He is like, he does have his own agency, but at the same time, he's a man trapped in a nightmare future. And so he became a nightmare, I guess.